Hi guys, and welcome to another InstaMAT tutorial. In this one we are gonna cover InstaMAT's powerful flood fill nodes and what you can do with them, how you can apply effects to your shapes like for materials like brick walls or pavements or rocks. Initially this video was a part of the last one where I covered the brick generator, but after I recorded it I saw that the video is quite long, so I decided to split it up. So if you want to know what you can do with the brick generator, which is quite a powerful node, you can just check my last video. And for this one we are going to focus on the flood fill nodes. So again, as this video is already recorded, we'll make a cut now and start from scratch. And yeah, let's just begin. So I already prepared the nodes that I wanted to show. Let's decrease the bevel and increase the gap a bit. So again, for flood fill we need a binary mask like this one, so we have full white cells and black borders basically. So in general, what is flood fill? Flood fill is an algorithm that will take similar colored areas or cells and fill it with a different color, allowing to further process them and apply effects, adding variation and such. So this node here isn't meant to be used by itself, but it is a starting point to process through other nodes. And as mentioned, it doesn't work with every input. Preferably you will use a binary mask with separated shapes, like this from the brick generator here. Maybe we could adjust the tile a bit so we resemble bricks a bit more. So also we have this flood fill output here, and we could use the output on all those nodes. Let's use the flood fill itself. And let's disable it here. This is something I have prepared for later. So let's start with the flood fill to B-box. In general, I like to use flood fill for all kinds of stuff, but it's great for rocks, for example. And with the flood fill to B-box, when you have a rock setup that has bigger and smaller rocks, this will be nice to get some height variation so that the bigger rocks are higher on the height map and the smaller rocks are not as high. So as all of those shapes have the same size, you see the same color in every of the cells. But when we go to, let's just use split position. We can compute the ranges, but we don't need this in most cases, so let's just go with them disabled, and we can normalize the output. So basically we're doing in outer levels. We can include and exclude the borders. And we can change the box type by width, by height, min, max, area, center X, center Y. So this is a very useful node and easy to explain as well. So when we now input it into the outer levels here, you can see that the smaller cells are low and the bigger cells are higher. Then we have a flood fill to color node. I already enabled the grayscale setting, but when we disable it, you can see that every cell is filled with a different color. And when we use the grayscale permutation, you can see that all the cells are filled with a different grayscale value. So this is not like the flood fill to B-box where bigger shapes are higher, it's just random. But for example, when we blend it over the flood fill to B-box node, we can introduce even more variance. And this node doesn't have many settings. You can just sample the colors from an image again, like from a pollen noise. So the grayscale values will be based on this noise. But let's keep it as is. We can adjust the size range. We also have an anti-aliasing setting. So for bricks like this, it's not really needed, but if you have rounder shapes, it's quite useful. So that's it from the flat filter color node. Then we have a flat filter corner node. This is really interesting. This can also bring in more variation. So basically what this is about for me mostly is to bring in variation to shapes. The flat filter corner is especially useful. As you can see, it cuts off corners, and we have different settings for this. The iteration count is, I think, basically a quality setting, but it can make it also finer or coarser, so useful as well. We have distance, so how much is being cut off. We can increase or decrease the softness. This actually gives some nice chiseling on the edges. We can also change the roundness. Can preserve the cell size. So when we enable use corner, we have only the corner which is cut off as an output. We can use a flat fill on this again, so we could, for example, input this flat fill node here. Also a gradient output, so it gets a bit softer on the edges. Can change the contrast. We have some advanced settings like quality, precision type. It's also a quality setting. We could use a distance input, so all of the cells are a bit different. For example, let's input this in. So now the cutoff edges are based on the grayscale values, so where it's white, it's cut off a bit more, and where it's darker, the cutoff isn't visible at all for black values, for example. And for the grayscale values, it's everything in between. So yeah, again, something for a bit more variation. Let's take the gradient mask and blend it over our blend node here, where we are blending the flat filter B-box and flat filter color node. And let's multiply it. If you don't want to have those softer corners, you can just use the mask. So it's cut off completely. Or just the corners, but then we would subtract it. But let's use the gradient with a multiply. Flat filter gradient is also great as it can bring in some slope variance. As you can see, currently we have the gradient facing from left to right, but we can bring in some angle variance. And let's blend it over. Let's multiply it again. This node has some more settings, like for example an angle input where you can input an angle map or gradient input as well. So this is basically the same with based on the noise. Let's take something different, maybe the spots noise. So the gradients are now based on the spots noise. Some position variance parameter, position seed, factor. The gradient sampling is just where it's gonna be sampled from the image. Then we have the gradient to NPass node. This is quite nice as this will introduce effects like you would make with different nodes. So this will do the same or something similar as when you would use multiply flat filter gradient nodes and blend them with the minimum setting. So it will apply variance as well. So this is especially nice for rocks. Let's blend it over to show you the output. Let's use the multiply as well. This is great for all kinds of stuff, but I think mostly rocks. You have many settings for how you want your gradients to look like. That's a really powerful node, and it will save you a really big setup for the same effect. You can also change the blend mode for different effects. This looks kind of funny but nice. Can you imagine something like this for a stylized material? This looks quite cool. Let's go back to min. I think this is the use case you will mostly use it with, the mode actually. So the next one, flat filter random direction, or actually let's do it last. Flat filter slope is also great. Let's set it to default settings. Yes, you can see again, this is basically all about variation in your materials. So this makes some really nice corners, or it introduces a nice slope to your corners. Let's blend it over as well. To get rid of this stepping, you will have to increase your quality settings. Also many nice settings to change the effect. Let's normalize it and let's blend it by default. Then we have the Flatful Mapper, which is also quite nice. Let's set it to grayscale. And we can map any type of images into it. For example, let's use the Perlin noise. As you can see, the Perlin noise will be mapped into all of the cells. We can do it by tile UV or image UV, so you get the whole map, whole image or noise mapped into the cells as is. For tile UV, it's quite nice to use a shape, for example. Or let's go with the polygon straight. Let's scale it up. So this is useful for many things, like you can see we can cut off the edges a bit more, or we can also map an image into it, or we can do both. Let's decrease the count. So like this, when we map it in, and use a multiply on it. We have even more variance in here with nice cut-off edges. Let's actually use another one, and let's use a directional noise. Let's use this one. Let's map it into the cells. Blend it over. So we can either add some cut-off edge effect or just map an image into it, so we get some details on the bricks. If we change to image center, we get the whole noise. And as you can see, it will be rotated and scaled accordingly to what we set up. And yeah, last but not least, this is a Flatful to random direction node. This is quite useful if you want to implement some cracks, for example, or other effects on your bricks or tiles. So we have this set to subtract and an opacity of 30. And as you can see, the cracks look very projected on the bricks. And here's one straight line. So that looks really unnatural, as when bricks are separated like this, they wouldn't, in most cases, wouldn't crack with a straight line of cracks. So we can fix this by using the vector warp node. Input our cracks, and then let's input the Flatful to random direction as vector input. And when we input this now into the foreground of the blend node, you can see that they are distributed randomly now. You can also change the intensity of the warp. So as you can see, it will warp them based on the color of the cells. So for example, this cell goes up, this goes to the left. So yeah, I think those are my most used flat fill nodes. Again, I mostly use them for tiles like this, for bricks, for pavements, and also for rocks. So they are quite useful for many scenarios. And yeah, I think for material creation, those are some of the most useful and powerful nodes. There's another example I wanted to show you with the flat fill node itself. Usually, from my experience, when you have tileable shapes like those and you use flat fill, it doesn't really work. As you can see, it's cut off here, and here the colors are the same, so it's of no use basically. But in InstaMAT, you can set the flat fill node's mode to tileable shapes, and as you can see, it works flawlessly, and our flat fill nodes are working on those as well. We have also a setting for complex shapes, and yeah, in most cases you have to see which one you will use, the default or the complex shapes one, as for some shapes this one works better, for other shapes this one works better. But again, for tileable shapes, we always use tileable shapes, and our flat fill nodes will work flawlessly. So yeah, I think that's it for this video. So we covered the brick generator as well as some of the existing flat fill nodes in InstaMAT. Of course, we have more flat fill nodes, but again, I think those are the ones I use most often. While cutting the video, I realized that I forgot to mention one really important flat fill node. It's the flat fill filter. And this node is a bit special. You won't use it for effects and such, but it will filter out shapes. For example, if you have an input where you want to filter out smaller shapes or bigger shapes, you would use the flat fill filter node. I show this in this example with the brick generator. So when we use the flat fill filter, we have different mode settings. So the first mode is the input node. It will filter out shapes or cells randomly. When we use the density slider here, it's currently at 1, so every cell is visible like in the input. But when we decrease the parameter, you can see that it filters out shapes randomly. But we could also set it to size, for example, and then we have the size range slider here. So when we take the left handle and drag it to the right, you can see that it starts to filter out the smaller shapes. And if we use the right handle and drag it to the left, you can see it starts to filter out the bigger shapes first. We can also do a combination. So we can filter the biggest shapes and the smallest shapes here. We can also set the box type to width, height and area. I think that when you choose width, it will consider the widest cells first, with height the highest, and area I think is the shapes that cover the biggest area. We have some other interesting modes like position. So position lets you filter out shapes based on the position gizmo here. And we could also set it to input and input a shape like this circle, for example. And this will filter out the shapes based on the circle or your input. This is a really interesting and very useful node in many scenarios. This was a rather more technical video again. I asked in the community post if you are interested in those, and I got replies that it would be great. But it would be great if you tell me if you like this kind of videos and if I should present more of the nodes that exist in InstaMAT and how you use them. Or if you want to have more practical videos like the material I did last time or some layering tutorials. So yeah, just let me know. And of course, if you have any questions left, just ask in the comments. And Yeah, until next time, thanks for watching.